Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the good year that we've had on our Tuesday morning fellowships, the good fellowship, the good stories, the good information, learning lots of things that we never knew. At least in my case, I wish I could remember more than 10% of it. Ask that you bless this day. Be with our church search committees as they continue their search and finalizing for a new lead pastor, and for the music search committees as they look for new directors and organists. Be with them, guide them to make the right selections and presentations of those folks to us. Ask that you be with all of us that are in the congregation and our friends that are in need of your healing touch and grace. And also ask that you be with the governments, the leaders of the world, that they can somehow find ways to peace in the many different troubled areas of the world these days. Ask that you bless this day. Amen.
Okay, you're not the only one with memory problems. I remember reading or hearing that a significant portion of the iron production in the British colonies and maybe even the world came right here in Pennsylvania, came right from Pennsylvania. So our speaker today is Jim Ziegler. He's executive director for the last 10 years of the National Iron and Steel Heritage Museum in Coatesville. He managed the acquisition of the former Lucan Steel Mill and Motor House to make into this National Iron and Steel Museum. He has brochures here. It's a fascinating place to go. Right here. I remember maybe 15 years ago going to the ArcelorMittal electric furnace, and it's just intriguing to see how they make steel and how the old guys, they didn't use thermometers or anything. They sort of went, they looked at the color of the melt, and they knew it was ready. Anyway, Jim has a bachelor's from Temple and MBA from Westchester University. Without further ado, Jim Ziegler.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. Just a couple commonalities that we have. I'm a member of New London Presbyterian Church. Our group, we have a Friday morning Bible study, which came out of our home group. The home group came out of our new member class 15 years ago. Over the years, I've been every denomination, like Jewish and Catholic. Hopefully I have a few years ahead and we can work on that. Nevertheless, that's a few of the commonalities. I apologize, this is not the PowerPoint presentation. The one I brought has the shortcut that still resides on the laptop. But we do have what you would see if you go to our website, steelmuseum.org. So this will work. It will give you plenty of information. History, I'll just do what may or may not be here. The history is what we call Lucan Steel. Over the years, it's been purchased. It started out in 1810 by Isaac Pennock. Pennock is a well-known Southern Chester County name. Isaac's great-grandfather received a William Penn land grant in Penns Grove. So that's where the family were farmers. Isaac, the great-grandson, decided he wanted to get into iron making. And he started a rolling mill outside of Coatesville, Route 82 North. There's a little deli before you turn into the steel plant. It was called Webster's Store when I was a kid. Now it's called Triple Fresh. But down from there, before you get there, is an area called Rokeby on 82. That's where Isaac had his first rolling mill. He came to Coatesville in 1810. It still continues to operate. It is the longest continuously operating iron and steel plant in North America. Wow. Some precede it, We are familiar with our good friends to the north, the Pottses and so on. They're not operating anymore. So the key to that phrase is longest continuously operating steel mill. And it is continuously operating, chatting with some of you. So it was Brandywine Iron and Nail Factory back from Mr. Pennick's day. And then his daughter, Rebecca Lukens, who is our hero, America's first female industrialist, and that's qualified too. We know that a couple of the Potts women's precede Rebecca, but she was an industrialist. She had a couple of other businesses. So that's what qualifies that. But at any rate, Mr. Pennick had Rebecca and her husband, Dr. Charles Lukens, operating the plant for a number of years. Dr. Lukens was a Philadelphia physician, University of Pennsylvania Medical School educated, met Rebecca on one of her trips with her father to Philadelphia. The Pennicks were and are Quakers. Some of them are Presbyterians now, the Houston, but Quakers. And so the Quakers educated their young ladies to the same level as the boys. So she was the oldest, so she went to Westtown Friends and then on to Wilmington Friends, which at that time for a young lady would be the equivalent of almost a college education. Upon graduation, she rode at her father's side. She often visited the iron company, so she was familiar with it. Meeting Dr. Lukens on a business trip to Philadelphia, they became married. Dr. Lukens left his medical practice to come to what is now Coatesville to run his father-in-law's rolling mill. And Isaac went back to Rokeby, about 4 miles south, and continued to operate rolling. But as you know, Lukens, and I'll just refer to it as Lukens because that's how we know it, is on Business Route 30, right next to the Pennsylvania Railroad main line. So the distribution's better. Isaac gets his iron from furnaces and forges north of town, Hibernia, Hopewell, Joanna up in Morgantown, among others. They're our real close friends, so they come out and talks. So iron brought in as pig iron, reheated, rolled in Coatesville, goes out as plate. It's changed a little. Now it's steel, comes in as scrap, goes out as plate. But back to the chronology. So Rebecca is familiar with the iron making, and within about 14 months, Isaac Pennick, Dr. Charles Lukens, and a young son, Rebecca and Charles, die from the yellow fever, one of the fevers that go through. Probably not unlike what we've been through here recently. So Dr. Lukens' deathbed wish was, Rebecca, keep it going. She was very familiar with the operation, and she did keep it going. Rebecca and Charles are survived by grown daughters only. They had 2 sons, they both died in their youth. So the Lukens name in that family, side of the family, leaves with Rebecca and Charles's passing. Now, Rob Lukens was the director of the Chester County Historical Society for many years. Different Lukens family, probably all come from Germantown, Jan Luken, which is where Charles's family originated. So in honor of Charles and Rebecca, their son-in-law, Dr. Charles Houston, names the company Luken Steel. Dr. Houston was also a Philadelphia physician, East Thomas Jefferson Medical School, who comes to Coatesville to run his mother-in-law's rolling mill. And Dr. Houston takes him into steel making in the late 1800s. And they remain family operated until 1972. Charles Lukens Houston Jr. was the last family member to be the chairman and CEO. and then after him come management teams. Lucan Steel until 98. In 1998, Bethlehem purchases Lucan Steel. It becomes Bethlehem Plate. Bethlehem takes bankruptcy shortly thereafter in 2000, 2001. And a company called International Steel Group acquires the assets of Bethlehem Steel. So the flag changes now to ISG, International Steel Group. The assets of International Steel Group are purchased by an Indian industrialist, Mr. Middle. So it becomes Middle Steel for a number of years. Mr. Middle combines his company with a European company, Arcelor, which was a combination in itself, headquartered in Luxembourg. Mr. Middle's offices still are in London. So they operate, they're the world's largest mining and steel operating conglomerate. So last year, ArcelorMittal sold their North American assets to 1850 established Cleveland Cliffs, an old company, not as old as our plant, but they're close, 1810, 1850. So that's who operates the plant now. It's always been profitable. It's very specialized steel. Right now, the big contract is with the Navy for armor plate. Now they make a lot of those projects. The tanks, the Abrams tanks, the M1, A1 Abrams, Humvees, a lot of military applications, a lot of shipbuilding. Dr. Lukens in 1825 got the contract for an iron hull ship called the Codorus. The Codorus is a tributary off the Susquehanna. So he won that contract, iron hulled steamship. It was the first American contract of iron in America, American contract. Prior to that, it was European, and we fought a war over that we call the Revolution because it was all imported. Took our goods, made steel, made iron, brought it back, and sold it back to us. So now they're in shipbuilding. They still are. ArcelorMittal put out in their newsletter not too long ago that 90% of the aircraft carriers, battleships, and destroyers had ArcelorMittal steel in them, armor plate. ArcelorMittal made armor plate in two plants, Coatesville and in Burns Harbor. So the likelihood that that steel came out of Coatesville is quite high. Right now, they have a contract with the Navy to replace the current submarine fleet over the next 10 years. So it's a good contract to have. They've also done such notable buildings as the World Trade Center, Towers 1 and 2. We have those pieces at Coatesville, one of which is erected. We have 28 pieces. The rest of it we will re-erect. We're doing fundraising now. It's the largest collection of World Trade Center steel there is. And that's a story in itself. And then Cleveland Cliffs. So that's the chronology of the owners of the plant. Why don't we take a look at what we have here? And this, I think you'll find interesting, Lucan's life. So this came from a grant through the National Archives, working with Hagley. There was a newsletter on a monthly basis called Lucan's Life. And it talked about the people, the process, and the products coming out of the plant. Our number one question on the phone is, my family member worked there, what do you know? Well, we don't know anything because we don't have the personnel records. They resided with Lukens, then Bethlehem, and I'm not sure where they are now. But we invited them in because we have copies of this Lucan's Life magazine from the 1930s to 1990s. And we'd invite them in and look up whatever period you think your family member worked here. and you're welcome to come in. Some did, but not many. Now, through this grant, you can do a keyword search. So you can put in Ziegler, because my dad worked there. And see if there are any articles about him. Now, it will show the issues, and you can do this with something that you're researching. If you're researching the furnace, which was mentioned earlier, if you're researching the 206-inch rolling mill, you put that in there, and it'll show you where that shows up. And it doesn't leave you there at the issue. If you go to the bottom of the page, there are highlights. This highlight here, now that shows Hal Ziegler. He was a local baseball player and coach. So you go right to the page, and from the comfort of wherever you are. We used to say the comfort of your home, but you can use your phone to look it up from our website. So this has been a very nice resource for the public. It was mentioned about Lukens. So there are still what are called Lukenites. It was a family. They refer to themselves as Lukenites. And they were given years of service pins. And we did that up until a couple of years ago. So we would contact the HR department at ArcelorMittal and say, we're going to do the pins this year at the garden party. We do 5-year increments from 20 years on, and they'd send us the names. So the first year we did it, there were 2 names there at 50 years. So they were obviously there when it was Lukens. The next year when we did it, the people from 49 years bumped up to 50, and there were 15 of them. So there are quite a few people over at the plant that have been there quite a while, is the point here. What's interesting is that it has changed over the years. After World War II, there were as many as 6,300 employees. That was the peak. Now there are about 630 employees, and they produce more steel than the others, depending on orders, and that's why they are still around. If they don't have an order, they're not making steel. Now, there are a few grades of steel that they can make and stockpile, so a customer calls and says, I need such and such because I'm building such and such. They can fill that order immediately. Otherwise, they say, we're building the Verrazano Bridge, we're building, say, Seattle Space Needle, which they did, St. Louis Arch, Veterans Stadium. Here's our project, oil rigs in the Gulf. What do we need? So the company, the purchasing company, will work with the metallurgists from the plant to come up with a grade of steel that would be conducive to whatever it is that they're building. And so it will take a while, obviously, to get to that point.
That's true.
So that is an overview of the plant. We have the current plant superintendent has been with the company, the steel company, for 30 years. So he was a Lukenite. Now they're called Cliffs. They're out of Cleveland. They're called Cliffs. So we've met with him. He's great. The previous superintendent gave us the 2 manufacturing buildings that were mentioned. In 2016, there were still 2 buildings adjacent to us. We're at Business Route 30 and South First Avenue, which seems like Route 82. Route 82 comes down from the north. You go under the railroad bridge, come to the lake, and we're 14 acres there to the south. The plant is to the west over the creek. So we have the historic homes. We have Rebecca's home and her family homes up and down South First Avenue. From the office building, we could tell the story of, the employees who were in suits, who were the office employees, but we really couldn't tell the steelworkers' stories. So now with the acquisition of the 120-inch motor house and the 120-inch rolling mill buildings, The motor house is 30,000 square feet, and if you come to visit, you will go in. The 120 Mill building is 90,000 square feet, and we need to clean it up. It's not a lot of environmental problems. As a matter of fact, ArcelorMittal would not have transferred it to us had there been problems. It's just above residential, which means we can't build condos there. No intention of doing that, but we have environmental companies, as I mentioned, in the building, and they've done the testing. And there are 3 levels of exposure that are of concern or of note. There's me, who's in there all the time. Then there will be the contractors who come in to refurbish it into an actual museum, visitor center, and so on. They'll be there for a period of time, 3 to 6 months daily. And then there's the visitor who goes in for 10 minutes in their lifetime. So that's the lowest exposure you'll have to asbestos and some of the things that I don't understand. The groundwater is safe. It goes into the Brandywine. We're on the west branch of the Brandywine. The east branch comes through Downingtown, all the grist mills, lots of iron rolling mills along the west branch. As a matter of fact, back in the 1800s, there were as many as 5 iron mills in Coatesville. Wow. So it's water powered. Now it's electric furnace. And that is something to see. As you travel north on South First Avenue from Triple Fresh and you come across the plant, there are 2 railroad tracks. The furnace is on the right. The view is better when you're retracing your steps and heading back down to Route 82. The scrapyard is to your left and the furnace, and it's enormous. And it's something to behold. The steel is melted about 3,500 degrees. So going in there, you need protective clothing and all that type of thing. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that 630 people do this because it's a great manufacturing job. And the products that come out of that plant and other plants, Nucor and the ones that are still around, are wonderful. There was a lot of talk about the tariffs and how does that help the steel workers, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, for the steel workers, it was a good thing because that meant the contracts were going to be coming in. And in a plant like Coatesville, if you don't have a contract, you're getting laid off. So it's good to have contracts. Lukens purchased a steel company in Conshohocken known as Allen Wood Steel at that time. So in the late 70s, Lukens purchased Allen Wood. It's now called Conshohocken. So Coatesville and Conshohocken are like sister plants. The building that we received from ArcelorMittal had a 120-inch rolling mill in it. Conshohocken has a 120-inch rolling mill. So because of the recent acquisition in the late 70s, early 80s, this rolling mill in Coatesville was closed because they wanted to protect their investment that they just made in Conshohocken. So that's why we have the buildings, and they will become part of the museum. They are a part of the museum now. As I said, you go into the motor house. It's full of exhibits in there. Talking to Rick, we have 2 fire engines and an ambulance. They're in running order. They're in working order. The ambulance gets out more because it's on automatic. It's just in better shape. This is in the center of your brochure. The fire engines, one is a 46 and the other is a 64. They don't do parades too well because they have a clutch, and as you know, parades takes an hour to get from stop light to stop light. So just not healthy for the vehicles. And another aside, you may or may not know, in Unionville, the Last Chance Garage, owned by Lou Mandich Jr. Now, Lou's dad, Lou Sr., worked at the plant. He was a senior management team. So Lou Jr. Maintains our vehicles. As I was mentioning in chatting earlier, I have a bill on my desk from recent maintenance, so we need to see that Lou's paid. So there are a lot of local connections. We do talks, I do talks. We were shut down for COVID. And then I'll wrap it up. I don't know how long to go, but.
We can go to 10 of and then Q&A.
Okay. So Q&A might work because you may have questions that I'm not going to touch on until you ask. But at any rate, the management teams that came in have many family members that are still in the area. We were shut down for COVID the night that the governor shut us down. We were in a board meeting and it was 7:30 at night. And my boss, Scott Houston, a descendant of Rebecca's, looked at his phone, got some kind of message, and he said, "Meeting's adjourned, we're closed. Don't come back." The police sit out in our back parking lot. It's a great place. You know, we have an east end and a west end of Coatesville. So it's a great place for them to be. You know, if they get a call, they're halfway to wherever they want to go. So they're out back all the time. And as you recall, when this first hit, we didn't know what to expect. This was a Thursday night. So what do we do on Friday? So some of us, the property manager who maintains the 14 acres and the homes and the steel manufacturing buildings, started coming in regularly. I had to go in to sign checks and do bills on a weekly basis. We had to keep the place going. And if I got stopped, I got stopped. Never got stopped. Parking lot was empty. Everything was empty. But we maintained it. We shut off the visitors immediately, and we reopened the visitors in July of last year. During that time, we took one of our buildings, which was a barn. This property was a 110-acre working farm originally on the Brandywine. It had a sawmill, which Mr. Pennick converted into a rolling mill. At the site of the original barn was a reconstructed barn in 2008. And we took that building, which had the fire engines in it, which had lathes and a bunch of bandsaws that you can see down in the motor house now. We emptied it and we created a visitor center. So when you come to visit, you come to the office building, we'll check in, use the restrooms, go down to the visitor center, begin the tour, 45 minutes or so there, go on down to the motor house. That's part of the general admission. If you're interested, then we can go over to the two historic homes that we have open, Dr. Charles Houston's house, known as Terracina, and Abram Houston's house across the street, which is known as Greystone. And that's where we get our name. We are the Greystone Society. That's the 501c3, started in 1984. Each of the municipalities in Chester County at that time was encouraged by the then Chester County Commissioners to form a group to celebrate the upcoming county tricentennial, which we did. Centennial came and went. We met over in Greystone Mansion, hence the name, the Greystone Society. In 1985, Terracina became available. So the city wanted us to take it because the widow of Stuart Houston wanted to transfer it to the city. Well, the city wasn't interested in an 1849 house. They were occupying an 1889 house known as Greystone, which was then City Hall. It was a family home from 1889 to 1932. Upon A.F. Houston's passing, Mrs. Houston gave it to the city, and it became City Hall until the 1990s when they built a new City Hall next to it. So they weren't interested in an older house because the building they were in was old enough. So they encouraged us to acquire Terracina, full of antiques, beautiful property. Greystone has beautiful architecture. We acquired that then. Office building we acquired when Bethlehem came in and closed everything, sold the building. Stuart Houston Charitable Trust purchased the building. So those are the grounds that you will visit. Those are the 14 acres of the Lukens National Historic District. It is a National Historic Landmark, which is a designation of the Department of the Interior's National Park Service. The highest level that all the properties are on the registry. But the Lukens National Historic District and the Pennsylvania Railroad Main Line High Bridge is also a landmark. So there within one city block, you have 2 landmarks. So I encourage you to visit us. We are on town tours and village walks. And so that is on July 21st. What we do there is we take visitors and we'll have ambassadors of each of the properties tell you a little bit about each of the properties. There's not a lot in this talk about iron and steel making because, as I mentioned in the beginning, I don't have the PowerPoint. It's not working. So on our website, you can get all these exhibits in iron and steel making. Also during the shutdown time from 2020 to 2021, we took a lot of content that you get from a visit and put it on the website because the students are at home, the parents are at home with the students, and I don't know if your families went through homeschooling during that time, but the students are finished before lunch. So now they're looking for something to do. Now, weather like this, send them outside and play, but in the winter months, they're still, hibernating. So we did all this content that the students can then use to further explore if they're interested. Our website had about 50,000 visitors per year up until 2019. In 2020, we went to 75,000 website visitors. In 2021, we had 120 website visitors. So I don't know that we're going to eclipse 120 this year, but what's interesting is with the kids back in school, we're still getting the website hits. So there's a tremendous interest. It's basically, we're on YouTube and all that. We measure all these metrics in KPI, key performance indicators on a monthly basis. And so we take a look at our YouTube visitation and what are they watching? What are people interested in? Well, it's always iron and steel, but we have lectures and a lot of people watch the lectures. Like this is a Zoom, and welcome y'all. Sorry you have to see my back. We've gotten to learn.
See your face from the
Okay, they
laptop
see me
camera.
here. Okay, so we've learned, our lectures are very, very interesting. A recent lecture last year during Women's History Month, on the videos, quite a few, but if you go back and you click on this and you can see the lecture as little or as much as you want. But we had, Luken Steel was in, or iron and steel was in the America's Cup racing guns. So in 1995, there was an all-female America's Cup crew. Dawn Riley was the skipper of that crew. So Dawn did the Zoom lecture there. We had done Zooms for the 6 months prior to that, but Dawn, who was on Long Island, said, can we make it interactive? I would like my friends and family to be able to pepper me with questions, which they did. So instead of, as you know, with usual Zooms, there's a moderator and you raise your hand and they write down your question and then they get back to you at the end. Dawn had them peppering her right away. It made it interesting for the rest of us. Also broadened our audience because nobody's coming down from Long Island and New England to Coatesville to see a 15-minute, 20-minute lecture plus Q&A. The next month we had the Coast Guard, which is here, Coast Guard Icebreakers. We had the skipper, Greg Ketchum, was on that one. And we talked about, Greg, we're learning how to do this interactive Zoom. Do you want to do that? He said, I can see why that would work, but I might find it a little distracting. Let's do it the old-fashioned way. His was an excellent lecture. If you watch, you'll see. He was on board an icebreaker. Coast Guard owns the icebreakers. You may or may not know that. 3 of them are on order. I think 1's complete, 2 more are being built now. Manhattan was the big one, had Lucan Steel in it. But Greg either was very thorough with his lecture, or everybody was in the kitchen at the refrigerator because he had no questions. So to you presenters, keep that in mind. If interaction is available, you might say, yes, I'll take that. So again, I apologize for not having the PowerPoint. Kind of walked you down the street. Rebecca's house was built in 1739 by the Fleming family. Fleming family were early settlers in what is now Coatesville. Interestingly, while they came to America, 2 brothers lived in caves while they built the house, which was not unusual. And then when the house was finished, they called the family over. So that's 1739. It has an addition on it from 1787. That was built by Moses Coates, for whom the town is named. Moses was a Phoenixville entrepreneur who came to Coatesville, became the postmaster, among other things. So that's the significance historically of that building. And then to us, Rebecca and Charles lived there. So it means a lot to the Steel story. But we've become friendly with the Fleming family. 4 of them, 2 fathers and their 2 sons, came a couple years ago specifically to see Brandywine Mansion. That's what we call it. It's not open because we're redoing the roof, the basement, and the exterior. So it's a construction site. Dale Friends from Westchester, you may or may not know. That's why Pattern and Knives was showing up on it. Friends and Friends was purchased by another company out of St. Louis, but they're still here. Dale's retiring, but they've done all our historic work. And so it's under construction. We showed the Flemings the house. They loved it. Earlier this year, 2 of the sons came back with a 1796 clock, which is in Terracina, on loan. So we don't touch it. If they give it to us, then we can maintain it. But until then, it's on loan and it's just there for dusting and for people to see. So again, Terracina's full of antiques, interesting place to see. Greystone has wonderful architecture. So with that, I'll stop talking and entertain questions. Yes.
As a kid, taking the Chestnut Hill local down through Wayne Junction, I was aware of Midvale Steel. Midvale versus Wilkins.
Midvale had a plant in South Coatesville. It is not there anymore, but there was another family in town that had 2 college-educated sons that competed with the Houstons. And so they sold their plant to Midvale. And then they went on down to Sparrows Point. They sold out to Bethlehem very early in the turn of the last century. So yes, Midvale did have a plant in South Coatesville.
Now, Midvale and Wayne Junction area in Philadelphia, they shut down entirely. They're gone.
They're gone,
Okay.
as far as I know.
Were they doing similar type of steel as Lukens?
No, and that's another reason why Lukens has remained is this iron plate that they make. It's kind of unique. Other places, one of the reasons that they're attractive, the plant is attractive, is because the other companies don't make it, and it makes a nice addition to their inventory of sales. But my understanding is the South Coatesville plant made munitions for Midvale.
Help me in the geography, because I know we're on 30 and what is that, South Street, where your museum is.
Yes.
When you go down, travel that road south down to Modena,
Yes.
there's all that steel works. It looks like one contiguous steel works. Is that all Lukens or? is it-
Yeah. So as you come down South First Avenue, it seems like 82, but it's South First Avenue. Keep the plant on your right. So you go past us, come to a fork,
Yep.
go down the hill, becomes Youngsburg Road somewhere, but it's the same road. Cross the railroad tracks. If you turn left, you'll go past the furnace, which is on your left, and you're above it. So you're looking down. Can't see it now, but in the winter, you can look right down when the leaves aren't on the trees. And then that will take you down to Modena, which had, the paper mill and Lipset, and had a bunch of things down there. If you turn right there, after the second railroad tracks, you'll go back into Coatesville, skirting the south of town, with the plant down below you. The rolling mills are down there. And then you'll come out on 82 in West End. And then you turn right and head back up north to Business Route 30, and you will go through the plant again on the west side. So the scrap trucks come in from 82, they come in north, south, east, and west. We see them where we are coming mainly down Route 82. A couple will come through town, east and west, and then they'll go down South First Avenue to the furnace, to the scrap yard, and leave empty. And some days they come in 2 by 2, lined up at the stoplight. So then once it's melted, it makes its way up to the rolling mills, which are right across from where we are. It's just south of Business 30. There are two. There's the 140, which is the workhorse, 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week when they have the orders. And then the 206. So they're referring to stand to stand. So it's 140 inches wide. The plate that comes off there is less than that, 135 or something like that. The 206 is 206 inches wide, and the plate that comes from that is about 195 inches. That's one of the reasons they get the contracts like the World Trade Center building, because it's so big they don't need as many welding joints. Mr. or Dr. Lukens took them into shipbuilding. He went into steam, boilerplate, right at the time of the industrial age. And they were known for their boilerplate for many years. Steam locomotives, steam ships. That's how they got into both of those businesses and remain in ships and locomotives, even though it's not steam anymore. They do the heavy steel. It's a tremendously heavy. And so in the trains, they'll do the undercarriage, the truck of the trains. And then in the ships, for military purposes, it's the iron plate, but they're in the United States. Again, they were in racing yachts. Interestingly, that we learned with racing yachts, because of the speed and the turns, the torque on those wooden boats, back when they were wooden, they're fiberglass catamarans now, but back when they were wooden, the stress on the wood, both the hull and the deck, was extreme. So it was reinforced with iron. So it's an iron reinforced hull and iron reinforced deck. So they took those turns and everything didn't splinter. Yeah.
How thick is the typical plate?
It depends on the order. So they can go down to less than a half, like 3/8.
What's the max?
It comes in, so there's an interesting video on these videos shown here of what they'll often do is they'll take from the furnace and have an ingot there. And so the molten steel is poured into an ingot for later use. So great big 30-inch thick, maybe 4 feet tall slab of steel. Well, it's not a slab, it becomes a slab. So ingot is then reheated. So it's poured down at the furnace, reheated up at the rolling mills, because the rolling mills have pickling mills, but pickling furnaces there, which means they're going to reheat it. It's right there at the mill, and then they'll roll it to the desired. When you visit the rolling mill, what's interesting is they'll have the monitor up there, and maybe 10 different orders. And so the one that's at the top is the one that's being rolled right now. And so that's someone's order that's going to become something, and that purchaser is waiting for it. Well, one of our visits over there, they're nice enough to let us come in and show it to us so that we can interpret it to people. One of us asked a question. Now, there are 3 guys there with joysticks, and they're operating this rolling mill. So they're operating the rollers, and then there are some pieces out here spinning, and the plate comes out, and they can spin it and send it back through. So it's a reversing mill, it goes out and back, out and back. So one of us asked a question, and the gentleman was nice enough to answer, and he turned to answer, and as he did, the plate became askew. So they called a crane operator, and he came over, and he tried to pick it up, and he couldn't get it. So they said, get so-and-so. Well, they got so-and-so, and so-and-so had a female voice. So-and-so is a female. And she came over and she picked it right up and took it back over to the pickling mill and got it back in. But the point is, that guy who was number 1 is not even on the monitor right now. He's got to wait his turn, which was a terrible mistake on our part to even ask the question of these guys who were in operation. But I don't think he got fired. I've seen him around. Yes, sir.
The early colonial iron was bog iron, I guess, from South Jersey. When did they discover these surface iron ore deposits in, what is it, northern Chester and Berks and Lebanon counties?
So the comment was made, I guess by Dave. I guess you are.
Yeah.
So you made the comment that, there's so much iron making in our area. The minerals used, iron and limestone coming over from New Jersey, and coal. So coal's readily available in southeastern Pennsylvania. And the other components, as well as the water. They were waterworks originally. So they're readily available in our area for whatever kind of iron they're making. They were mentioning in chatting earlier, Phoenix steel, wrought iron for their purposes. So the different components that go into whatever that company makes as a product, or the iron that they make that becomes whatever it becomes as a final product, is readily available in southeastern Pennsylvania, as well as the water power back when that was the mode of power.
Did any of Washington's cannon come from here? I think there was someplace in Reading that forged his cannons for him.
And Phoenixville made cannon. Phoenix made cannon too. The connection with Washington. So when he was at Valley Forge and Moses Coates was in Phoenixville, the reason, as you know, that Washington was in Valley Forge and not trying to take over Philadelphia is he was protecting the forges, foundries, and furnaces and rolling mills out here. So that's why he camped there. While at Valley Forge, he became friends with Moses Coates, who was nearby. And so when Moses purchased and added on to this house in Coatesville, the Fleming house, on his way back from putting down the Whiskey Rebellion uprising, Washington stopped in to have dinner with Moses Coates at his place. And there's a table that Primitive Hall has. That's also a Pennock residence in West Marlboro. I passed it on the way here. So they have a table, with an inscription that George Washington sat here. As a matter of fact, I think it's property of the Historical Society, or what is now known as the History Center. I think they own the table, but it's at Primitive Hall. So yes, there was a connection.
With the approval of the infrastructure bill, I would think that the iron demand would be escalating with the bridges and things like that across the US.
There's no doubt. My boss is Scott Houston, his father, Skip Houston. Skip tells a story. He was vice president of government relations when his dad, C.L. Houston Jr., was the last family member to run it. So Skip, vice president of government relations, is very familiar. He says that every bridge on the New Jersey Turnpike from exit 1 to 7 has Lucan steel in it. So yeah, the bridges, I mentioned Verrazano, Walt Whitman, lots of bridges, at least on the East Coast, because on the West Coast, Golden Gate, they had their own bridge suppliers there. But yes, so a lot of bridges. We have interns that do work for us, and we had an intern that went through the records, just the records that we have on site in one of our records vaults there in the building. And he went through and created a spreadsheet, broke it down beautifully. I think he went to Geneva College, of products and so on. And so it's nicely organized. But then he went through the records. He has photographs. They were already there. Lucan's had this. And it would be the purchaser and what it became. And then we were looking at what congressional district is it in? So we can contact, those representatives and say, did you know there's Lucan Steel, in your area? So we never got that far, but so yeah, the records are wonderful. The bulk of our records are at Hagley, which makes it nice. We, other than me and the property manager and our digital guy, who are full-time, everybody else is part-time. So someone doing research calls us, it'll be a long time before we get back to them, within a week. But if a researcher calls Hagley, they have 7 or 8 librarians, and they can go look it up because they have the company records, and they can look it up and help that researcher with the book or the lecture. What's interesting is with our lectures, I mentioned that we measured the YouTube visits. 2 of our lecturers are still practicing professors. So we'll see their lectures spike at different times during the semester. And we'll know that that evening they're teaching and they're showing their class, their lecture, which was in Coatesville. So. Yes, sir.
Everything you make is plate, there's no coiled steel?
No. ArcelorMittal did, and there's a very interesting video that ArcelorMittal did in 2014, which is a little confusing because it's, ArcelorMittal company and all the different things that they do. I think it opens with mining. There was some vertical integration that Lucan's explored, as did many steel, US Steel, a lot of them Marathon Oil, US Steel bought Marathon, I think. But they tried vertical integration. Lucan's did too, down to mining. I think they had some coal fields in Virginia all the way up. Very expensive to oversee. That's when they went from Lucan Steel to Lucan's Inc. Washington Steel, they purchased other steel companies unsuccessfully. So they just make the core product now and let somebody else make something out of it. Yeah.
Your raw material is scrap.
Yes.
And where's that come from?
All different
What's
suppliers.
it composed of?
Steel, mostly steel. And then when they bring it in, they work with the metallurgists. What are you building? So they have to add alloys, nickel, magnesium, they're listed somewhere. I'm drawing a blank now, but the different alloys that will then create different steel than what that scrap is. And they'll do a small batch. We have a test lab. So one of their old test labs we have on site, not operating yet, but we want to get it up and running. We have 3 furnaces, a small rolling mill, and the test equipment where it tests the tensile strength. It twists it and stretches it to see that the components are right for strength of what they want to build. Once it passes, they'll make a big batch and put it in the furnace. So they'll do a test first. And it's interesting to see the recipe as it is of all the different additives, alloys that go into whatever they're working on right now. It is a, yes.
I was doing a Civil War project and I researched Lukens a little bit. Huge conflict, but the Lukens were conflicted too, because hey, I'm a Quaker, I can't sell to the military,
Right.
Yet I'm a businessman and I make iron plate. So I think their solution was, we're not going to sell iron plate to the government, but we'll sell it to you. And if it happens to end up in an ironclad being built in Wilmington or something, we don't know about that. Was that sort of their attitude?
Yes, but it became less so. When Rebecca was there, it was no military applications. Rebecca retired and shortly thereafter passed away in 1854, almost at her 60th birthday. So at that point, Dr. Houston and another brother-in-law had formed a company. So this is in the 1850s. By the time they got to the 1860s, they were making iron that went into the Monitor class of battleship. Now, the Monitor came out of Troy, New York, and it did not have Lukens iron or Brandywine Iron Works iron in it. But the Monitor class had Brandywine Iron Works iron in it.
One was built in Wilmington. I think it was called the Saugus.
Yes.
It was built in Wilmington.
Yeah.
It had somehow got Lukens plate in it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, C.L. Houston Jr. was on the board of Newport News's whole shipbuilding complex down there. So yeah, and then Bath, Maine. That's where we got one of our products that is shown there, a sonar sphere, and then Groton, Connecticut. A lot of a lot of shipbuilding. Yes.
I'm looking at the map here.
Yes.
Years ago, I used to play music at Harrison House. Now I know I go Route 30, the exit for 82, down to the bottom, traffic light, turn right, go up a little bit, and then turn left. Is that south for First Avenue where I would turn left?
No. So Harrison House is the old Coatesville Hospital.
Right.
So you come down 82, go west on 30, past church to the next street, Strode Avenue, and then you turn left. Now you're going through the plant again. Go past a little bit of a residential section.
Right.
You're
Right.
going past, you go across 2 railroad tracks.
Correct. All right.
And then Harrison House is up on the hill on the right.
Okay.
Yes.
So all of this is in relation to
It is east of that.
east of it. Okay.
From Harrison House, you're overlooking the plant.
I have 2 questions. Mackinac Bridge in Michigan, does that have Lukens steel?
I don't know.
And the other one that I assume didn't have Lukens steel is the one that collapsed in Pittsburgh.
Recently.
I don't know.
Yeah.
When we don't know, we say, I don't know. Is it in this project? And it's like, oh, that would be neat if it is, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And then we'll go look it up.
Yeah.
We can. Yes.
With the electric furnaces now, as a youngster, I remember going to the Ridge Pike Drive-In up in Conshohocken.
Right.
And behind the big screen you could just see a reddish glow at nighttime. That was not electric furnaces at that time. That was probably gas or whatever they used.
Open hearth.
Open hearth. Do they use the electric furnaces? Do they create that redness also?
Yeah, now, you can't see it the way you used to be able to see it because it is enclosed,
Okay.
at least in the Coatesville plant. You have to be inside to see it. But there is a glow because they keep the doors open because it's so hot. So if you were on the plant, particularly on the east side of the plant, through the open doors, it would glow. So if you're down in Modena, you might be able to see a glow.
As a kid, it was always scary to see that the end of the world, you know, behind the movie screen.
Yeah, Atlas Shrugged. I don't know if you read that book, but it's interesting. It depicts steel making very well. Yes.
Yes, it was probably 20 or 30 years ago. I worked at Phoenix Steel in Claymont, right on the Delaware River. And they had 2 electric reclamation steel furnaces there. They didn't make any from ore, it was reclamation. And a couple times I got to observe at close range the operation of the electric furnace. Now I had to wear special glasses to do that, otherwise it could ruin my eyes. And it's huge, 3 huge carbon electric rods that went down to touch the cold steel when they were originally starting the meltdown. And then after they had a meltdown and a pool of liquid steel in there, they still held the rods maybe about that far off the top, and you could see the fire from those electrodes. Quite an experience.
It is. The one visit I've had to the furnace. So we go over and we check in at the headquarters and we get cleared, ear pads. We all have hard hats now, safety glasses. And then we have guides. So 2 steel manufacturing guys took us over to the furnace and we stood outside. So we were 100 yards away from the furnace. And so as we're looking in, they're just about to tap or pour steel out of the furnace. It is white hot.
Mm-hmm.
It is that hot. The guy, everybody wears these flame retardant green suits in the plant. But the guys at the furnace wear the silver protective suits and hats and visors.
Oh yeah, it's a triple visor.
Yeah, so they're right next to it, so they do pour it, take it away, and that's a whole process in itself. But while we were standing there chatting with our guides, we heard this tremendous noise.
Oh yeah,
Well, they're
it makes a
filling
racket.
the furnace with scrap, and then the electrodes go in, and it bangs like we're outside,
Yeah.
and we could not talk to each other. It's that loud.
Oh yeah, it's when those electrodes touch that cold steel, I call it an explosion.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
so loud.
It really is.
And I was told that Phoenix Steel had to notify the electric company every time they were getting ready to use electricity because it's such a huge draw.
Interesting.
Big draw power.
It is. So Philadelphia Electric is the supplier for Coatesville. There are 2 substations, one in the west end, one just across the street from the furnace. So a number of years ago, Lukens asked PECO for a rate reduction, was denied. Now, PP&L, the Lancaster County line, is not far from us. It's maybe 15 miles. And of course, PP&L service areas in Ackland and Christiana across the Chester County line. So Lukens approached PP&L about being the supplier. Shortly thereafter, PECO gave a rate reduction. So thank you all.
Jim, thank you very much.